difference between the papers too. I think when I was looking at the headlines this morning, many of the Murdoch papers were actually still running with a terrorism theme, talking about Australians overseas, showing pictures of themselves on the internet saying, you know, we will have heads rolling and so on, whereas Fairfax Press hasn't really chosen to go down that line, not deeming that as newsworthy, I guess because it's just some extremist or nutter on the internet without anything happening. So, you know, there seems to be...
And whether that inflames the ongoing issue that the Muslim community faces. Yes,
yeah, journalism is where there's a really strong story. The strongest story across all the newspapers today is, of course, the $20 rebate cut to Medicare, which I think is of great interest to most Australians. The fact that the Prime Minister on Wednesday interrupted his holidays to say, yes, we're going to have a $20 cut to the rebate, what you get back from from Medicare when you go to the doctor for a short visit. And then the new Health Minister, Susan Ley, stopped her holidays altogether and said, no, 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 yesterday we're not doing it. And which is really interesting, and it's analysed differently in different papers. Like the Financial Review calls it a quick defeat for new minister, but then goes on to say, but this is a great thing because it'll stop conflict in the Senate and it will, she'll get on well with the AMA. And then others have said, well, it's obviously about the Queensland state election because, you know, they want not to have an impact, a flow-on effect of losing Liberal votes there. And then the Australian is saying, well, this might herald a bit of a pullback on all the budget measures that were deemed to be unpopular and causing Tony Abbott's decline in the polls.
Well, yeah, they're calling it a strategy, a new strategy.
Yes, they are. They're actually saying it's a new strategy, and we can see some change in the $5 billion savings that are coming from higher education changes. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually is a strategy.
Well, it's and then of course it's a question of whether you have to do the tough things if you are elected to government and not just worry about popularity. I mean, the Gillard government.
That's a new thought. My goodness, Bev. I don't see any government thinking that.
Well, it's true, but I mean, when you look back, I mean, Gillard was hugely criticised, but she got a lot of legislation through, and that's just through negotiating.
Yes, exactly, and that's what Susan Ley is saying to the AMA at least. Like, we want to negotiate, we want to discuss. You know, I will take. I think it's interesting. She stood right up to her Prime Minister and done something that undoubtedly is quite popular. It seems to be quite popular across the board, and so we'll wait and see whether that new negotiation goes ahead.
I think that's where the interest lies in the next month or two, is whether or not that reshuffle that was had just before the year passed away will actually, you know, take effect, and whether these ministers will be able to pick up and run their own portfolios.
Yes, because this in fact was put through as regulation by the previous Health Minister, Abbott Health Minister, just before Christmas. So, right, you know, she's actually taken her own stamp on it already, which is interesting. The next major story, which I think is really important, having just come back from Tasmania yesterday and you know, with international guests, and we're all just going, wow, this place, the wilderness here, is that there's a new draft plan by the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. The Liberal government has put this draft plan in, which is actually going to open up most of it to it's going to change wilderness areas to remote recreation areas. And this is a World Heritage Area where we've signed up to a convention saying that we will protect and conserve and so on for future generations the wilderness of Tasmania, which is about a quarter of Tasmania. It's the largest temperate
very
forest.
Limited tourist incursion in that.
That's right, walking tours and tiny bits, and some that can't be touched at all. And some tourist operators are saying, yes, this is a good thing, you know, we're very responsible, we're just having walking tours and a few huts and so on. But of course the Greens and the Bob Brown Foundation and all sorts of other more conservationists are saying this is terrible. It'll open straight away about 30,000 hectares to logging. I mean, it's going to be a new battleground, I think.
What areas of the state were they particularly talking about? What have the tourism operators got their eyes on?
Well, they've got to have their eyes on all of it because, in fact, it's 1.58 million, I think, hectares. So that's the whole area, you know, the Gordon Franklin, all of it would be open to this remote recreation.
Sensible, no-impact tourism, they call it.
Yes, that's right. But, you know, it's actually supposed to be a World Heritage Site for conservation, or so it says. But it's actually a draft paper. It's open for discussion until March the 22nd. But when you look at the fine print of the criteria that they will accept discussion on, it has to fit in with their overall aims, which is specified towards these open to remote recreation, and has to only be about new information and stuff like that. So it's pretty tight. So I think think there's a bit of a fight for conservationists if that's the way they want to
Imagine
go.
Bob Brown coming out of
Retirement.
coming out of retirement,
Wow, and leaving us all, and David Attenborough, in his wheelchair, come there again. And the final one, I want to ask you what you're doing on Australia Day, because there is a call
Yes.
us all to stand at noon and sing the national anthem, which I think is hilarious.
It is
and I
hilarious.
noticed that the Sydney Morning Herald, I think, actually printed the words of the national anthem because no one knows them.
Well,
So
I'm
that
actually
we
an
can-
Australia Day ambassador, so I will be singing,
Oh,
not
you
at
will be
midday,
singing.
but
Oh,
it
really?
is quite funny how very few people do know the words. I've
you
Oh,
always
you
sing?
sort of
noticed
get Australians, all that. Ask for choice.
yeah, mumble, mumble, mumble.
Do you know both verses?
I don't know
Is that what
both
you have to sing?
verses, but
Good thing you
I
admit it,
don't
because I was gonna
sing because I can't. So I sort of
hum.
I can't sing, so I keep my voice very, very low.
yes,
but
you mouth
but we
loudly.
should celebrate, and it is a
Yes.
wonderful day, and there's so many fantastic activities that are organised on behalf of the community.
Of course, it's always a tortured day. Again, having just been in Tasmania
Oh,
and thinking
yes.
about the Aboriginal story in Tasmania. So
Yeah, I
for
don't-
some Australians, it's not the same. Now there's a lot of awareness that it's not a celebration for everybody.
Australia Day doesn't rate very highly for me.
Well, you know what rates for me is meeting the people who've become Australians.
Yeah, I've been
For
some
example,
of
I
those some of those ceremonies they have for nationalising people. That is probably the only time I've been moved on
That's when,
Australia Day.
and I
That's right,
think you
hard
realise
stories.
just the vast, last year just talking to a Cambodian taxi driver about how grateful he is to be here, and that's when you realise that spirit. They just, to them, it means an awful lot. It is a difficult day, but I think I think it doesn't mean we don't also reflect on that issue and reflect on what's happened in the past, and think about, rather than just going to the beach and lying down and have a great time, thinking about what we want to be, of the country to be in the future.
Yeah, I think the
So
Australian
I think it's
identity is the important
Australia
bit.
Day of the Year, we do like that. We've been talking to all the nominees. I
Yeah.
think they do that.
Well, that
There's
happens on
some
that
good
day.
aspects. I exercise my right as an Australian on Australia Day to do whatever I like
And that's
and
fine
to not
too.
sing any songs.
You're not going to be standing up in your Speedos on the beach then and singing Advance Australia.
Negative. No, I got rid of my
Negative on
Speedos years ago.
Any sensible man would. All right, now,
Careful.
Let's go to Sydney Morning Herald, Gail.
Oh, well, I think it's really interesting too. There's this other article in there which I immediately zoomed on because it's to do with women and science. Of course, I was a scientist in a previous life. Anyway, it's a very interesting study by a Princeton group. It's published in the magazine Science, which is one of the most esteemed international peer-reviewed journals. And it's saying that you find mostly that women do not dominate in the hard sciences, which is things like physics and maths and so on. And it's been thought it's because women gravitate towards the scientists that require a bit of empathy and a lot of hard work and family-friendly hours. And what they've found actually is that's not true at all, that women are just as brilliant and that they are able to do, and they do and predominate and do brilliantly in the areas that need maths and use physics and so on, but they're just not labelled as that. And the reason seems to be because there's a prevailing belief by both men and women that you need to have an innate brilliance, which men have, if you're in philosophy or physics. It's something you're born with and you can't just work hard to get. Which I think is really interesting. So that's another area of...
I'd say not buying that one, sorry.
I'm not buying that either, but we've got to do something about,
It's a conversation we don't have time for this morning,
that's
because
right.
I can feel myself getting angry at
That's
the very
right, exactly.
thought.
So we'll move on.
We'll move on. Gail, good to see you. Thanks
Good
so
to see you
much.
both.
And we won't get angry, but we will start
You can
talking.
tell when Bev gets angry, by the way.
She just moves on.
She smiles and it's more of a grimace. That's it?
You are causing a lot of trouble for me
Sorry,
this
yeah, it's
morning.
Friday.
It is Friday, and he's very mischievous. And I tell you, he does wear Speedos all the time. In fact, he comes in them in the morning.
I'm actually from Victoria. I find them repulsive. I've never ever worn them. Footy shorts would go for me. We've been talking about Oscars nominations this morning. One of the Best Pictures nominations is the film Selma. It depicts a defining